I'm going to get started here. My name is Mike Gilbert. I'm here with Larry Michaels.
Yep.
And Kristie has set this up. And honestly, I'm surprised this many people came.
He always says that.
Well, yeah. I mean, so thank you for coming.
Yes.
I'm going to start a little bit and tell you about what was here. This was the site of the Jackson Annex. Originally, the Ball Hotel was built right over here by a guy named Oscar Ball, who is a direct descendant of Martha Ball Washington, who was the mother of George. And his Lysander Curtis Ball is buried at Oakwood. And if you go to Mount Vernon, you'll see his name in the Bible. So he came from, he was born in 1795. He came to Fremont here, Lower Sandusky in 1818. He helped build the first bridge across the river, and he got a pair of shoes for it. And then he started a tin ship, oh, what do you call those guys that fix horseshoes?
Blacksmith.
Blacksmith, thank you. He had a blacksmith shop down the corner front in Krogan. Then he marries Patterson, and then they moved out to North Front Street, and they had a farm up the hill. So, like I said, he's buried out in Section 8 in Oakwood, and his name is at the family Bible. So, Oscar Ball was Lysander's son. He built the hotel in 1874. He then sold it to Jackson in 1900. Yeah, I might have my dates wrong, but we're in the ballpark. So he built the Jackson Hotel, and then we get the Jackson Annex, which was a beautiful building that they tore down here, which was not so beautiful when they did that, that had 200 girls that worked. And they walked right across the street to the Jackson Underwear Company. And in the hotel or the annex had chandeliers, a piano, a library. It was a great place to be, and it cost about $2 a week. And they said it was one of the best places to be in Northwest Ohio. So Jackson, of course, started the underwear company. He also had a razor, Jackson's Razors. He came to Fremont with about $17, and he was a guy that went around, I guess you'd call him a sutler. He went around Northwest Ohio and he sold his wares, and he became so known for his honesty that he was able to build himself into the business that we know as Jackson. When the Strand started in 1915, he bought a piano, because it was all silent movies then, for $10,000. That was in the basement of this building, and there was a fire, but it had all the bells and whistles. So when you went to the silent movie, the guy's playing the piano, and he can make all the noises that you wanted. And the first movie opened 1915. They got an Australian beauty who had been naked in one of her movies, and for some reason a lot of people came to the movie that night. And I can't remember her name, but it was 1915.
It doesn't matter. It was all about the body.
It was all about the performance. So anyway, when part of this burned down in I think around the 50s, they're looking for this piano, and it was down in the basement, just kind of left alone. So a guy from Lexington, Kentucky comes up and bought it, put it in his personal home, refurbished it, and now it's down in Florida in a museum. So you buy a piano for $10,000 in 1950, and that shows you how much money they had. They had a women's and men's restroom, which was unusual. They had floorboard heating. If you go into the place where they usually have the big banquets, that's where the theater was. And they always told you that when you went to the Strand, you should put your feet up on the chair to keep the rats from going up your pant leg. Because this was considered the poor man's theater. This is where the blacks and minorities went. And the Paramount will open in 1931, and that's where the wealthy went. Now, what's the wealthy? Well, this is like 5 cents a movie. Paramount would be 10 to 15 cents. So that's kind of a little bit of the history of this area. And Oscar Ball, by the way, goes to New England, becomes addicted to morphine, and dies. So it's kind of a sad story there. But
You know, Mike and I were just talking too about the Ball House is the big one on the corner there. You can see above the other building. You can see the roof up there. That's the half that's left. If you look between right up at the top of the roof, right above that building in front there, you can see some writing up there. And we think that actually said Ball House at one time, which would have been before 1900 when Jackson bought it. It was, the writing's up there that long, 25 years or more. And then, and then the building here at the right where the Strand is now, that was the livery stable at the ball house. So we think that was probably built at the same time, 1874. And that's still there. I mean, it's been changed some. And then George Keller calls it the Strand now, the restaurant. Because like Mike said, that was the theater in the ball house. It's called the Strand, Jackson by then. From the 1920s to the late 50s, around
Yeah, I think
there.
15 is when it opened, and I think the fire is like in the 50s.
15?
Yeah, 1915.
And then, and then, like Mike said, then the Paramount opened kind of right diagonally across the street. And then, talking about Jackson Underwear, if you look at the parking lot back here, you can see the mural on the Grady building. And so between that mural and then all the way down towards Garrison to the athletic supply down there, that was the Jackson Underwear factory. And they always say it was the largest underwear factory in the whole country because it was really big underwear. But he was in Bellevue, and he had several branches around, and
I think Anderson too, the guy that Anderson building.
Yeah.
I think he started one in Fostoria.
Oh, did
like
he?
The Jackson Underwear.
Yeah. And then in 1902, after Jackson bought the hotel, then he built the annex where the parking lot is right over here. And you remember that building, right? And it was, like Mike said, luxury at first, because Jackson had hundreds of those women sewing in there. And then it burned in 1984. And it sat there all those years until the amphitheater.
Until it was torn down,
It was torn down for the amphitheater. So we got this great facility here now.
What was this area?
You know, Mike?
Because there was buildings at one point, because I know when the city said they made it a parking lot.
Yeah.
So the downtown businesses actually owned, remember this was a parking lot? They actually owned the parking lot in the 70s and 80s, gave it back to the city, and the city said it needed repair because there are utilities underneath it. So when we built the amphitheater, there were already existing utilities, so there was a building here.
Well, Traumer was 117 Arch, right? Larry, I think 117 South Arch was Traumer.
Yeah.
So I think that was down there.
Or no, Traumer was back on the other
Back
side
here?
of Garrison.
Okay, Traumer was a Traumer malt
Yeah.
company that John Rice and Buckland, Stephen Buckland and Ralph Buckland went together, and it made $105,000 in 1905. And it was, they sold this malt for your stomach that Rice run across it in the Civil War, and he got the patent from a German guy. And Elijah and I were looking at it. We found a bottle that they're selling for $65. It's got the label on it. It's got German on the side, and it tells you what. And it obviously was pretty good. It wasn't like some of those fake elixirs that they were giving people back then, because you know about Coca-Cola. It was cocaine, and that was legal until 1896. So Coca-Cola is cocaine. So maybe that's why when you drink it, you get that little uprush.
I don't think they put it in anymore, do they?
I hope not. No, it's been illegal since 1896.
Has
supposedly.
it?
But directly behind you, since we're talking about, that used to be a grape. They made grapes right back there in that parking lot.
The former hospital is where you're talking about.
Right, former hospital, and there was grapes there.
Yeah.
And if you ever buy the old Hyman store on Lynn Street, behind that is Concord.
Yeah.
That's because they moved the grape place over there. And it was pretty well known in Northwest Ohio. They sold to churches and stuff like that. But I think it's kind of funny when and there's ads in newspapers from the time period about the grapes. I think that was a doctor's house. I think that was
Yes, it
Dr.
was.
That yellow house?
Yeah,
Yes.
Dr.
Yeah.
He had something to do with the
hospital.
grape and the grape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There's this area over there.
So if you have questions, ask. We probably won't know it, but
Apartments.
Yeah.
There's the Anderson.
There's
It's
the
just a
parking
gap.
lot. Yeah.
This is the early back.
Yeah. I just know when they did the construction, they said there was one. Yeah. So you don't usually find
Way
that
back.
space.
Our
street is
full. This 1990.
Yeah, it was down by what I heard, 70s, 60s.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
We
some of
got
you
some
might
earlier.
remember across on the other side of the street in that parking lot where the bank is, used to be a Coleman's Ice Cream, used to be a Kroger's over there, and there was some kind of furniture store, I think maybe called Black Furniture, or Bond Furniture.
Bond.
Okay. And I thought they had maybe a bait shop, like out front here, on the other side.
I don't know.
There was a lot of business over in there.
And you told him this was a grocery, the Anderson building.
It was a grocery.
Yep.
And I met her. She's still living. Long and Boggs owned it, and she's 97. She's still living. I talked to her, and she told me about Coleman's Ice Cream, and I thought, I'd never heard of that. But I looked it up, and she was right. It's right across the street, and that parking lot was Coleman.
Yeah.
I think Kristie started down there on Arch Street too.
Yeah.
Kind of where,
I believe. Yeah.
yeah,
Referred to
between
it
Garrison
before.
and Krogan.
Yeah.
But now the News Messenger was there too, you might remember, before they added on to Krogan Colonial. So this was all packed down
Yeah.
here.
It was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always in a downtown. Well, you guys will probably all know this. When you see an empty space in a downtown, there was a building.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of these
Yeah.
buildings too had extra floors.
They did.
I mean, you're
Before
this
fire.
grassy lot. You all
Yeah.
know this. The grassy lot, which is not a part of the amphitheater complex, that had, if you remember, Miley Law Office and Singer was the last.
The
That
burn.
actually was
Yeah,
a
that
four-story
fire.
building,
Yeah.
and then it burnt. They took off the top. It burnt. They took off the top, and then the last time it was down to a one-story, and they
Yeah.
demolished it. And that's of course where you see the difference on this wall here, where you see the painted brick and the unpainted. That's where the building was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that burned in what, 2014, 2015?
Right around
Yeah.
there.
Because I remember I had just moved into my office, which is right back here, and the fire department was spraying down buildings and everything because they were afraid it was going to catch the rest of the buildings. So
By the way, the Jackson factory. The Jackson factory.
pay no attention to the
Is
cat.
that the amphitheater cat?
It's my cat. She follows me. I apologize.
Don't talk to anybody else.
Yeah, she.
The parking lot where Jackson was, that was torn down in 1977.
Yeah.
That's when it became a parking lot. But in the right-hand side, where the mural, next to where the mural is, that was the Montgomery Wars.
Yeah, I remember
Anybody
that.
remembers that?
Yeah.
I vaguely remember
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember
Did that go all the way back then, right to the road? Is what I,
I don't think-
understand.
did it?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Montgomery Wars. was
See.
there.
Okay.
Way deep, yeah.
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 The auto part of the store was in back with
Yeah.
the tires and stuff.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, and then the Brady was the Lion store. at Montgomery,
Yeah.
too, I remember.
Beautiful woodwork in there yet.
Is there?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, so that's kind of the buildings right around here.
Yeah.
Want to just talk about the downtown?
Well, I
Or
can.
the-
Does anybody have any questions
Yeah.
about like the amphitheater
Yeah.
project or anything? So, the
Yeah.
amphitheater project, I know a lot of you all know, or maybe you don't. I mean, our commissioner does here, so one of our doesn't count does. But so the Fremont Community Amphitheater construction ended June of last year, late May, early June, and it's a $3.2 million project. The good news about the funding for that is we received a lot of state and federal monies that were earmarked specifically for entertainment districts and entertainment areas. So, I'm pleased that we got it. It was a very large, obviously, win for Fremont, but those funds usually go to big cities. And so we were able to get it for here. The rest of the money is private investment. The commissioners gave us some money, Rotary Club gave some money, and then the rest is private investment from individuals and businesses. So, it's a great complex. The stones that you see behind you are actually the foundation stones of the Jackson Annex. The city retained as much as they could from the Jackson Annex when it went down. So a big reason why it went down, several groups went through it, engineers. The foundation had shifted and it couldn't be saved because the previous owner of the Jackson Annex took out every little scrap of architectural detail and the support beams. And so he took out the support beams about 15 years before it went down, and then it started to shift. If you all remember, you saw big cracks going in it.
I think
So-
I have pictures of that on my phone.
And it couldn't be saved, and believe
Big
me,
the pictures of zoomed
They
in on the
took
big
out the
cramps.
support.
he took out the support beams because that's big money. You sell it for bars, new development, you name it. And so the beautiful banisters that you're all think they were all gone. There was it was a shell. And believe me, there were local developers that wanted to keep the four walls and do something, but it was deemed You couldn't keep it.
All right.
So the city saved as much as they could. They have more of those stones. They saved as much as they could, but that's a cool feature. I tell everybody, those are those wonderful sandstone stones that you saw at the base and around it. So that's a fun deal. And then there's a plaque going to go on that lamppost there that is going to be brass that's going to get installed this year, kind of commemorating it. And the gentleman here helped me with the wording for that. So that's a fun fact about the amphitheater. Also, the amphitheater was built, as you can kind of see, on an angle. It's obviously to take advantage of the sunlight and things like that. It's also built like this because the idea was when you have a group like us of 20, it looks nice and full. But this green space, we had a concert and we had 125 people and there was still room in the green space. So this space is meant to look cozy for a small group or a big group. And that's why it's built this way, because even for events I've had, I've closed the parking lot and had vendors and things like that. So a minimum this space, 500 plus people. If you start using the alleyways and the roads, it can accommodate thousands, obviously. So kind of built specifically for that. The roof line, if you look at it, a lot of people have asked about the design of the amphitheater. So these gentlemen have a lot of history background. I also have several degrees in history, master's degrees and so forth. And when you are building in a historic district, you are never to recreate an old building. Because how do you match an 1890s building to an 18 building? You know, the bricks are different and everything. So when building in a historic district, you know, a good example is the old West End, you know, the Toledo Museum of Art. So what's the glass pavilion look like? It didn't try and match the original Toledo Museum of Art. It's a see-through glass structure, right? It's modern, it's kind of different. It's not trying to recreate what once was, it's trying to be something new. And so the design here, really the inspiration came from the Pagoda remember the Pagoda style train station that was on State Street? The architects, it was Thomas Porter out of Toledo. They said, you know, they kept pitching brick buildings, and quite honestly, it looked like a school. Nothing wrong with that, but this is an entertainment district. So they kept pitching brick buildings, and it looked bad with that brick and that brick. It looked odd. So then we sent them historic pictures of the pagoda-style train station, and they went with this roof line to match that origami or Asian-inspired roof line. So that's how they came out with this. They called it an origami-style roof, and it was based off that pagoda-style train station we had on State Street. So they pulled something from existing that happened in Fremont and made it look fresh. And then they added the brick, of course, to fit in. It doesn't compete with the red brick and so forth. So those are some fun facts. I'm sure I'm missing some. Comfort station that we added, that was a big plus that we wanted to do. Hookups for food trucks, you name it. So a lot of thought went into it. And again, you know, a good area, because with what I do as downtown Fremont, I close the roads a lot, and I don't really like closing the roads. So the whole goal is to close them a little less, get people kind of moving in this area, make the events get bigger, have more space to move. So big effort by the city, the county, and a lot of people to make this happen. So that's a little bit about the funding and how it came to be. If you have any other questions, you know, about it, let me know.
How long was the whole process?
So it started, I'd say 2 years of planning. So 2 years of planning. By that, architectural drawings, engineering drawings. The city was aware of funds. They started working on that grant process. So the city knew they wanted to do something for this is an entertainment district. It's also part of our DORA. So, you know, that was a big thing. So I'd say at least 2 years in architectural plannings and engineering. A year prior to that, trying to secure the funding. Where was it going to come from? Was it going to be state funds, federal funds, local funds? Then we got involved with Rotary. This is a capstone project of Rotary. They're doing a big project for their 100-year anniversary. So they gave money towards this, and what you may know is Rivercliff, but now it's Miller Park. So those monies they brought in, half came to here and half came to that. So it was a year of talking about it. Where's the funding going to come from? And when the funding was secured for, I'd say 70% of it, then they moved forward with architectural and engineer drawings. And then it took, as you all know, with any construction, it took probably a good year for all the construction, and it actually went over a little bit. because of, if you all remember, that's when steel prices went up and there was all those delays and stuff. So the project ballooned quite a bit because what they quoted at X went to X. So, but yeah, went over just by a few months, but it was a long process. Several years of talking, how it wants to look, and all of that. Yeah. And this was also, I believe there was some funding from EPA as well for this as well. So because you're reusing a site that had formerly been something else. Like the library. The library got some of those fundings too.
And if you have the programs, the upcoming events,
Yes.
we've got a lot of history ones are scheduled on Thursdays, right?
Yep, we do.
Yeah.
And then the next one is July 19th. That's, we're going to talk about the Sandusky County Historical Society.
what I was gonna-
And then we're going to sorry, wonderful training. And then we'll walk up the hill to see the Historical Society. So
That's 2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks from tonight.
Really?
Yeah, go ahead. And do any of you have any other questions in general about? Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
I'm curious about the annex. I think I heard you say there were 200 girls living there. I'm trying to, what was the time period of that?
1900s,
Okay.
early 1900s.
Where did 200 girls come, but from the area, from people, they came from other
I'm
places?
assuming they came from all around the area because it was a good place to work.
Okay.
Plus, all they had to do was walk across the street.
Right, yeah. But I was curious how they got.
Funny part is when I gave the talk at Spiegel Grove, a guy brought in a pair of Jackson underwear that hadn't been unpacked, and his mom had worked there, and he had it in the original package.
It's so hard to find.
Yeah.
That, Jack.
Because they called them like flannelettes, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, they did.
They were
Yeah.
called flannelettes.
Yeah.
Well, and two, at that time, that wasn't that part. That was the second Great Migration of people moving. That was part of the also second Great Migration where people were moving from rural areas to cities to get jobs.
Okay.
And very unusual to have unmarried females. So that's why this was built, because it was respectable. Respectable for them to do that.
Does anybody know what put Jackson out of business?
They do.
For one.
That's good, Kate. Yeah, about 1920. Women became flappers, and they weren't wearing petticoats and all those layers and corsets and everything.
No, so I just remembered it was Dr. Truesdale and Dr. Zimmerman who ran this grape thing, and they also ran what was called the Fremont Mitten Company, which was down on May Street, where now we have Senco, and Mitten Company had offices in Sandusky, I want to say Bellevue, but all around. And those two guys were in business together. Might be a connection. So it was Dr. Zimmerman, this was about in 1905, probably.
Jackson Air
1900?
Yeah. Oh, over half of what it is now. I mean, I don't know.
More than
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah, we
I
can
don't know,
look it up.
1860, it was like 3,000.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a place to be in the 1900s. We had, the Garrison had the Moore Carriage Factory, which was the largest carriage factory in the county. Then you had Oaks, which was across from Grace Lutheran, which was another one. And you had Pease over there on East State Street. So this was a booming place.
At what point did cutlery become
Early.
In the late 1800s. Klaus came in the 1880s. Kristie was going by 1900.
So I think somebody ran into Kristie in Sandusky, and he was making these knives, and he had something that was revolutionary, and I can't remember
It was
what.
a serrated knife.
Yeah, and he had something else too.
Oh.
A serrated knife and something else.
Retractable.
And a guy talked to him in Sandusky and got him to come here. So I'd say it's probably 1880s.
Yeah.
And if you go to Oakwood, you can see the Kristies because all their tombstones are triangular. They're easy to pick out.
So this underwear factory, it was women's underwear?
Yeah.
I was thinking long johns.
No, it was
Okay.
it was petticoats and corsets and
yeah.
girdles. I don't know what all they
I
made.
want to say probably the Bloomer put them out of business. Would that?
Well, he sold out, I think, in 1927. But in the 20s, everybody quit wearing that stuff. All the women quit wearing
Start
it.
showing ankles and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
Scandals.
they weren't doing the Charleston in their
Yeah.
corsets.
Yeah.
Yeah. so-
Never thought of underwear.
Keep the questions coming. Any other general downtown questions?
Well, can I just add, talking about 2 weeks from tonight, we'll meet here. If anybody come, we're just going to walk right up the street to the Historical
Yep.
Society.
When
And
is that?
2 weeks from tonight,
It's on
the
the
19th.
Okay.
Yep.
And we'll have the Historical Society house open. You
Yep.
just come through and look around. If you haven't been in there, that'll be 2 weeks from tonight. But we'll meet here
Yeah.
and tell people you know. And
What time?
6:30 we'll meet
6:30,
here.
same time.
Just walk up the hill. So you'll get a chance. We'll probably have some refreshments and just a chance to walk around. It's worth it, Jenny. It's worth it.
I know I
isn't
won't
it?
be here. It is worth it, yeah.
The woodwork's all original.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is
it's
beautiful.
beautiful, yes.
Yeah.
Somewhere down here, there was a livestock yard. Was that something that was
Stock.
old, or was that a more recent thing? I mean, it's been gone for a long
1900s.
time.
I'd say early 1900s it was there.
We got an aerial view of it.
That
It
was
big.
next to Jackson, or right here.
It was by the railroad.
By the-
Yeah,
bridge.
it's hard to tell
Kind of the
because the
bridge.
road splits when you come over the bridge down there, and where Hayes comes one
I
way, and
get
then
you.
it was right in there, right in that section where it splits off into, Water, Avis and
Yeah.
Hayes down
Yeah.
there. Just sat down there. Probably disappeared about the time they built the flood wall.
I came here in 75.
Yeah, about the time they built the flood
That was
wall.
71.
Yeah, so I don't know. We're here though to answer any,
Yeah.
or just bring up
Any other general questions?
downtown or anything in general about.
Otherwise, we'll
Fremont.
talk about stuff you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Rumors.
Mike knows all about the haunted places.
Yeah.
the
Sneak preview to other stuff. We'll be
brothels,
talking about
uh,
hidden places.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell. I'll tell you a honest story. There's a house at 503 Ewing. It used to be the Wilson House. It's just right down here, and it used to be where the old high school was.
Yeah.
So in 1931, they took the house and they moved it down there. It's a beautiful home, not now anymore. But a former student of mine owns that house, and I keep getting on. I said, "When are you going to fix this thing?" And he says, "Well, you're into ghost stories. I got a story for you." He says, "My daughter, when she was 5 years old, was talking to a boy in the mirror." I said, "Okay. And what did this boy say?" He said his name was Carol, and he was about 5 years old. And do you know anything about that? So I did a little bit of research, and I found out that he lived on Front Street, and he went to the doctor, Wilson's house, at this time was on Krogan, and he died in that house. His name was Carol, can't think of his last name, and he was 7 years old.
That house is really old. Probably
Inside.
1860s.
And Wilson's son shot himself in that house too. So
Is that right?
Oh yeah, upstairs.
You want to tell them about the Fabing house, right? The Fabing house is the corner of Garrison and Park with the little turret there on the corner. Frederick Fabing, that's 1850s. That was good. He was the gas company guy.
Well, I
And
taught at the junior high, and kids would always come and say, "Mr. Gilbert, that place is haunted," because I tell ghost stories. I still do. I've done it for. That's the only thing they remember I taught geography, history, but they remember ghost stories. And they would talk about coming back to that back stairwell and somebody pushing them. So the current lady that is doing, I don't know, aromatherapy or
Yeah.
something there.
Massage, the
Massage.
holistic.
I had her daughter in
Jackie.
school,
Yes.
Jackie.
Yep.
and
Yeah.
were you with me with her when she talked about the ghosts?
We were walking around Main
I
Street,
went in the house.
Park Avenue.
And we talked to her,
Yeah,
and she
yeah.
said there's two women in that house, which is what the kids had told me. One is older and one is younger, and I think Fabing's mother or mother-in-law lived there. I can't remember which, and his wife. And she called the mean one Bertha. that she actually felt hands on her when she's up in the stairs sometimes. So he did a little more research, and Frederick is buried at Oakwood, and the other two women are buried in St. Joe's. Now, maybe he wasn't Catholic, but it's just kind of weird.
Yeah. Poor Bertha.
Wasn't there some jealousy there or something?
Oh yeah, they didn't get along,
Yeah.
which is hard to imagine.
For
Mother-in-law and
ghosts.
a daughter.
Does anybody have any questions about the beginnings of Fremont? I mean, where-
Yeah. Tell us about it. I haven't read the book or anything, so.
Um, well, when was the battle? Fort Stevenson. 1813. 1813, the end of the War of 1812. 3 years later, Ohio platted out Crogansville on the east side of the river. 1816, there was some really old houses back up there, northeast part of the town. 1816, and the next year, 1817, they platted the downtown. A group of investors, 1817. They called that Sandusky. It's called the Kentucky Company. So you had Sandusky over here, you had Crogansville over there, and then it all came down to where they're going to put the courthouse. Because the county formed in 1820. And so they had to decide where the courthouse, because that was going to be their downtown. And in 1822, they decided to be on the west side. And the guy that decided that, you probably remember, it was Charles Sherman.
Yep.
It was General Sherman.
There's another ghost story too.
Yeah, okay. General William Tecumseh Sherman's father was here. He's the one that decided the courthouse. And then they built the first one in the 1820s then. It was built where the Methodist, Old Hayes Methodist here was at Park and Burchard. And that was way too far out in the country. It was all woods and everything. And so they moved it on big rollers and oxen, and they moved it down Croghan Street up the hill behind those buildings. You guys know this?
Yeah, we've walked past that one.
Yeah,
Kids
if
have
you're,
been there
if you're at the
once.
library,
Yeah.
you look across Croghan and you look up the hill, and between the buildings there's a stairway up
There
there.
is. It's got a cool little house. It's like hidden.
There's also a
Yeah.
gravestone up there.
Yeah.
And a gravestone up
There's a
there.
gravestone.
Uriah Drake.
Uriah Drake.
Uriah Drake
Yeah.
from 1811, before the battle.
Yeah.
And so you look up the hill and you see that old courthouse up there. And it looks pretty much just the same. It got stuccoed over and added onto, but it looks just the same. The federal building. That was 1820s courthouse still up there.
So what year was the courthouse, that is now established? What year was that?
1843.
1843.
So that was the courthouse.
For a short time.
From 1820s,
Yeah.
and then they built the current one in 1843.
So
And
they had to build it bigger because they just outgrew that one?
well, yeah,
Or it has to
yeah,
be more majestic.
yeah, and yeah, it's pretty primitive.
This was a rough place to live.
It was. Between 1829 and 1849, it's called Lower Sandusky.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and that's
In
was pretty rough.
1849 it became Fremont then.
Yeah, and Hayes is the one that filed the petition for a name change just
yeah.
before he left, the young lawyer. And so for 20 years, it was Lower Sandusky. But it was booming, wasn't it, Mike? I mean, that's why Sardis came here.
Yep.
We're right on the edge of the Black Swan. So
Yeah.
when you read about the stories, like somebody'd say, "Well, we got to Fremont. We had to buy this horse for like $80. It was an old nag." Well, it was either that or nothing. So when you took off to go west, there is a mile marker at Franklin. It's a stone marker that says P39 because or 29. I think it's 29 miles from Franklin to Perrysburg. And that's because when you went from the river, the farthest you could get in one day was 1 mile. And that was Franklin. Because State Street Hill went straight up. So if you're looking at Franklin and you're looking south, that is a tavern from the back from those days.
The first
To
marker.
get to Lindsay was
Yeah.
4 days.
Yeah.
4 days.
4 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see those markers on your way to Perrysburg? That's what
And
they are.
On the north side
Right.
of
So
the
that's
Yes.
as far as you could get in one day? That's where they
That,
placed the
that was
markers at?
considered good
swamp.
to go
I
1
didn't
mile a
realize
day.
that.
Because
That's
we
what
are
drove
Black
the
Swamp.
marker
So those parts
placement.
of Norwalk, I mean, yeah.
So between the Sandusky and the Maumee Rivers, between here and Perrysburg, Lower Sandusky and Perrysburg, it's 31 miles. And so they put mile markers, which would be 30 markers.
Yeah.
And about 20 some of them are still there.
I think
Yeah.
that's the
there's
longest
quite a few.
continuous mile markers in the country.
It
It
is.
is.
And those were 1842.
and they are
Wow.
exactly a mile.
Yeah.
When did the railroad come in?
1850s,
Yeah.
Okay.
early 1850s, and it was the Swamp Road was the first road through the swamp, and so like Mike said,
The worst road in America,
yeah,
Route
they-
20.
and actually there was like an inn at a lot of the mile markers.
Yeah,
'cause you
that's
could
what
only
I
go a
always
mile.
heard. There was an inn at every mile marker.
And
so-
they'd come out and water the road so that it
I
would,
have heard that before too. I'm like,
so
what?
you'd have to stop.
So you say Route 20 is the worst road in
It
America?
was.
At that time, it was the worst road in America.
Do you know that it's also the longest road in America?
Susie just
Yeah.
goes
They
all the
they
way
just
to
did
Oregon.
an article on it.
Goes to
online.
Oregon.
Yeah.
Ray told me that. I don't know where he picked that up.
But those markers, if you look at the marker,
They're kind of built like.
it's a triangle.
Yeah, it's like a triangle.
And one side will say P, and the other side will say LS,
And
lowest
the
and
kid
dust.
just redone them for Boy Scouts. They're really nice.
Yeah, a guy from the historic site,
He did a nice
encouraged
job.
a guy named Easton Silva.
Did a nice job.
It was his Eagle Scout project.
Oh.
Yeah, he did a good job with
So
it.
there really isn't anything.
Silva.
Dean
for-
Silva was his
Silva.
father. Yeah,
His dad's
with the engineering.
engineer's office, Dean.
Dean was, and so that was his scout project.
Thanks for clarifying why it was rough here. It
Oh, it
was
was.
the black swamp. It was mosquitoes and mud. And,
Well, everybody got sick.
and two, you guys know how towns start. They're rough. That's usually a bar. Place to get transportation.
Downtime
So-
was a bar in 1822.
Yes. Yep.
The Sardis
1822.
talks about it.
Yeah.
It's called Leeson's Tavern.
Yeah.
Where was that?
We're downtime.
Where downtime was a bar, Leeson's Tavern, 1821, and then right around the corner where Joseph used to be was Deal's Tavern, and a guy had an ingrown toenail, and the owner held this guy's toe the whole night.
Oh my god.
I don't know if it's part of the service or not.
Just pay his bill is probably what it was.
Yeah, it was called Deal's. It was Deal's Hotel or boarding house, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So that's a little guide on that's above and beyond.
Yeah.
Well, Hayes was here from 1845 to 1849 as a young lawyer, because Sardis talked him into coming.
Yeah.
But they hated it. He wasn't even married then. It was just dirt roads, and
Yeah.
a mess. And so-
Sardis loved it, 'cause I think Sardis liked to drink.
yeah.
Because he would always remember what you drank, not so much your face. But. And Sophia, President's mom, hated it, but she would come up and take care of Sardis when he got sick. Because by the time he's about 25, he's pretty much an invalid. He's got chronic bronchitis. So he retires at the age of 29 because he's pulling in $50,000 a year with his store down here on the southeast corner. And there's letters from Sophia to Rutherford about don't fall in love with those sultry lower Sanduskyans. She doesn't like this place. Bull Run over there by Rawson was where a guy named Ellery Bascom and his gang used to jump people as they walked down that ditch. Because that ditch was called Bull Run, and they would take the cows right to the river. So it
Where's
was
that
not
at?
right at Rawson. the
Rawson.
Tracks.
Okay.
Those tracks were
There's
Yeah.
a
used.
ravine there that's
Okay.
actually a fillet. It's filled
Yeah.
in.
They would take cattle right to the
Yeah.
river there. It's called Bull Run, and
It's actually
nasty
been
place to
filled
be.
in.
That's kind
People got
Yeah.
jumped down there.
And wasn't there, wasn't the mob down here, or wasn't there like a bank robbery and something like that back in the probably
There used to be a
20s, 30s?
bullet
then?
holes at the federal.
Pensions or?
There were bullet holes on that bank that it's on the corner of Arch and State.
Yeah, because my grandma used to work at the bakery, and she would talk about how there was the mob came down to Fremont, they robbed the bank and everything else, and they were shooting, and she was working at the time.
Yep,
So I was like, that
that
that's
makes
scary.
sense. I think Roy Wilhelm talked about it.
Yeah, and one of his was it the Klan was here too?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? In the 20s, maybe even later.
Well, Klan was here in 23, 4, and 5. There's pictures of the Klan having a parade down State Street. And
Wow.
if you
They
wanted
were
to
shot.
call, they had a phone number
Wow.
out by Freddie's Car Wash. There was a little, like the pigeon place that was there. That was the Klan's headquarters.
Oh, wow.
So in the 20s, this was a hotbed for Klan. Indiana was the largest Klan membership in the United States. and we weren't far behind. There's a great book out called Fever in the Heartland by a guy named Ryan. It's excellent. It'll make you sick. But
Yeah.
But you can't stop
the Imperial Grand Wizard's uniform is at Spiegel Grove.
Huh.
He's a Fremonter, and we don't know who because it was donated anonymously.
What do you know about the train wreck in Lindsay?
In Muncie?
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Yeah.
Oh, in Lindsay.
I've got pictures of it.
Yeah.
When was it in?
In the
I don't
40s?
know.
I'd just be guessing. I don't
Yeah.
really know, but I've seen pictures of
There was a big derailment too down at the station, down here, Daryl, too. That Ken Dumminger's grandfather is in that picture in a buggy looking at it. There's
Oh, I
a
remember
crowd
that.
around there, and the whole train derailed down there.
it. And a bad one in the Republic, too.
Did they?
Republic had that.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I'm thinking 1900s, but I could be off. I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Wasn't Lindsay one of the train guys?
It was named after his daughter.
Named
I
after
think
his
at
daughter.
the town hall, they have pictures of the derailment and it says the year of it and everything.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you.
Yeah, I can't.
exactly.
I'm just guessing. I don't know.
Yeah,
Might have
but
been 18.
Lindsay was named after the
Superintendent.
superintendent's
Yeah.
daughter, so,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, Burgoon was superintendent of the railroad too. Earlier, that's why Burgoon, when they put the whole line up that goes through Burgoon and up through Gibsonburg, and William Harvey Gibson, the Civil War guy, and the statue in Tiffin. Yeah, he's the one that laid out Gibsonburg. That's 1870s.
He did a questionable job.
Well,
If you work there, you're going,
How many train depots or stations were in the county?
you know, there's still some left, right? The depot here in Fremont,
Yeah.
pizza.
They
that-
still have a Norfolk and Southern depot right there. It's not at the depot, it's
Right, it's
by
close.
It's still
Shumi's.
in it's Shumi's.
Yeah,
that
It's
their
still
house.
active.
Yeah, it's right
Shumi's
beside
place.
it,
Yeah, there's one there and then.
Adam Street.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Tiffin's got one that's still there too. That's the Seneca
Yeah.
Buck, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Bellevue's kind of the big,
yeah, Bellevue is a big
is
road
the big exchange.
area, but
I don't know how many depots are.
Yeah, I
you
know.
know, I couldn't
She's
tell
a
you
P.
exactly how many. But the one there at Depot Pizza, that would have been the one Hayes used. He just walked from Spiegel Grove over there,
Yeah, if you looked at that
Get on the
building,
train
it looks
and
original.
right to New York.
It's pretty old. It's
go to
pretty
New
old.
York, talk to Grant and stuff. You know, in the 1880s when he was
Yeah.
going all over the country.
Well, speaking of Grant, the house that used to be the Buckland House that's now owned by, is that the church still?
Yeah.
The corner of
Well,
Park?
it's not a church. No, it's a private individual bought it.
Okay, that house on the corner
Oh
of
yeah, the old
Buckland and
Reformed Church.
Park
Yeah.
Yeah.
was built in 1853, and it was well known throughout Northwest Ohio because it had black walnut. So it was a place where people would come to see chandeliers. I think he had heating,
Oh.
that kind of stuff.
That was Buckland.
And Buckland is famous because at the Battle of Shiloh, the 72nd, which were a group of men from here, held off the rebel charge for 2 hours. Now these guys trained down at the old fairgrounds down in Hobo Jungle, and they didn't have any guns. A lot of them were using brooms and stuff. So these 19 and 20-year-old kids, who were brothers and cousins and so on, they get down to Shiloh, and some of them are getting their guns on this ship called the Baltic. So they get out there and they're forming a line, and nobody has fought with any other regiments. Buckland is a lawyer. He's not military trained at all. And about 2 days previous, one of the men, Crockett, who was part of Buckland's brigade, goes to Sherman and says, "We've ran into skirmishers." And Sherman says, "Basic, you're crazier than hell. You don't know what you're talking about." Well, they weren't crazy. So on April 6, 1862, when the rebels attacked, our men are armed because Buckland said, "Sleep with your arms. There's men out there." So here they come, and both regiments on either side of our 72nd leave. So here we are, we're at the apex, and the whole rebel army's coming at us. Now this is the bloodiest day in the Civil War up to that time. So for 2 hours, they hold that line back. And to make a long story short, they saved Sherman and Grant's bacon.
Grant was across the river.
Yes, Grant is
Yeah.
accused of being drunk, and he'll lose his command for a few minutes, for a few days. But anyway, after the war, Grant, Sherman, Salmon Chase, who was Secretary of Treasury, and Benjamin Butler, who's the ugliest man you'll ever want to see. He
Worse
was-
than Bertha.
He was
Sorry.
he was so ugly that he was down in New Orleans, and he put it under
Oh my God, poor guy.
martial control, you know, and he said anybody that's out past 7 o'clock, any woman is a prostitute. So what the women did is they painted his picture on their potties, and they
The bottom of the.
bottom of the pot.
It's
So
like World War II, bombs away.
so Butler is here, Chase is here, and Mrs. Buckland says he's so long, I don't know where we're going to put him because Chase was 6'4", and Grant and Sherman all slept in the house. They remained friends with Buckland, and
Yeah.
Buckland, according to Hayes' diary, was just very droll. He says
Yeah.
he's so droll, but what a commander! And he did defeat Nathan Forrest,
Yeah.
which didn't happen.
Which was high rank, yeah.
And the battle flag of the 72nd is at the Historic Society. We've got the actual
It's on
battle
display.
flag there.
You want to tell where they got the flag? Go ahead and tell the story of the flag.
Well, I don't know all the details. That was Gessner.
Well, the
wasn't
funny
it?
part is that the women make this huge flag.
Yeah.
It was a big deal, man. You made the flag, and the women presented it. So Shiloh, they lose the flag. Gessner is 16 years old, and he lied to get in because he said, I stand over 18. And what he did is he put a piece of paper in his shoe that said, I'm over 18. So he said, are you over 18? He said, I stand on the fact I'm over 18. So he's 16. He gets captured. He gets away, and the men saying, what, you know, what a brave act. But they lose the flag. So Buckland throws a guy named Jacob Snyder under the bus. He writes back, it's Jacob Snyder's fault. All the other men of the 72nd say, no, it's not. It wasn't his fault. But they lost that flag. So he sends a guy back named Orrin England, because Buckland doesn't want to come back and tell these women they lost the flag. Well, they know they've lost it. They made another flag, and Orrin, I think in one battle, that guy wraps it around his body inside his clothing because he doesn't want to lose that flag, because they feared those women.
Yeah.
That was a huge deal.
Oh, the battle flags. Yeah.
And then it gets
Yeah.
Bogran. PST Bogran had it, and somebody went to a reunion in 1896, and they had that flag, and that's how it got back here.
Is that right?
I can't remember, but that's close.
You know, there's a great thing at the Hayes, and we've got them, the Pioneer yearbooks. Because when they started the Historical Society, Hayes actually was one of the founders, 1874, and so they'd have a meeting every year and a big picnic, and all the early pioneers would come back, and they would tell their stories, and they hired someone to write it all down. And so we've got all those in those Pioneer yearbooks, and that's where you get a picture like of what Buckland was like, because he was kind of sarcastic and droll and everything. And he's talking to Hayes, and they're all just, you know, and you get this picture of what these guys were doing. And the women, too. And so there's so much history there you can find that it's like you just go back and like you're there. And so, I don't know. Mike and I go up to the Hayes, or sitting over in the Historic Society, and just start reading this stuff.
If you want to read a gossip, you got to get a hold of Sarah Wilson Rice.
Yeah.
She marries
John
Rice,
Rice.
and he's 31, she's 19, and he's up to his elbows in blood and guts, and she sends a letter about, why aren't I pregnant?
Yeah.
Why didn't you get me pregnant before you left? And he's like, what? And after that battle, they accused the 72nd of cowardice, and Sarah wrote to him and said she was embarrassed, and he wrote back, so what are you talking about? Because they weren't cowards. It was just a big misunderstanding. But she writes about all things that's going on in Fremont. She'll write him, do you mind if I go to this ball in Fremont?
Yeah. And he's down there at Shiloh.
Yeah, he's
Trying
down
to
there.
like survive.
Yeah, trying to. He was the surgeon of the 72nd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many men did the 72nd lose at the Battle of Shiloh?
I don't know how many they lost there, but when they came back on furlough, because about 200 were captured and sent to Andersonville after Shiloh at a place called, can't think of the name, but they're captured there, they're sent down to Andersonville, and then when the men come back on furlough in about 1864, out of 1,000, there's 377.
They were in some pretty heavy.
They were in some
battles
really
besides
heavy fights.
Shiloh. Yeah.
And of course, if you were injured, you want to know.
Yeah.
It wasn't very good.
And
so,
and sick.
yeah.
Yeah.
Being a surgeon, that was not a fun position to have during the Civil War.
Rice does a resection of a shoulder. He cuts out part of the guy's shoulder and reattaches it. First time it ever been done, and it's about 1890. It's a few years before he dies, and the guy's name was Jackson. He says, "Jackson, how's your arm?" And Jackson hits him in the shoulder, and he says, "Oh, it looks pretty good, doesn't it?" So,
Yeah, lucky because most would have just cut his arm.
it's called, yeah, they would have just amputated, but
Yeah.
he called a resection.
Yeah.
So he was pretty good, and he was also at the bedside of Garfield, because he writes back to Hayes. They got his letter. He wrote back to his wife, President Garfield, who suffered for 80 days before he died.
Poked and prodded him unnecessarily and
Looking for the
caused-
bullet.
If they had left him alone, he'd have lived.
He would have.
Yeah. And Lucy Hayes' brother, right, Webb, he was the surgeon
Yep.
for Hayes' regiment, the 23rd. Yeah. So there are all these connections. Gosh, we got off on the Civil War.
I know.
But
Wow.
anything?
This is a pioneer scrapbook right here.
Yeah, it is. Any other
Yeah.
early Fremont questions? The State Street Bridge, you guys know the
Please
history?
tell them about.
The first one, when they started cutting Route 20 started from the Firelands, moving west, in the 1820s, and they built just a little wooden bridge over the river. Didn't last a few years. It was
There was
McPherson's.
some fire, correct? Wasn't there a fire with it too?
Might have.
Or is-
I don't
okay,
know.
yeah.
And then they built a big wooden covered bridge in the early 1840s. We got pictures of that. We passed that around.
Does it say like pedestrians walk? There's
Yeah.
a sign that says something about pedestrians.
You can only walk your horse
Yeah.
buggy 5 miles an hour going across.
The Dickinson house got stuck on that bridge. They were trying to move it from east side to west side.
Yeah. And there were two lanes. I mean, you could go one way on your buggies and style horses, and the other way there were two different. And then there were two side pedestrian walkways too. So there's actually 4. You know why they made covered bridges? Why they were covered? Like Mole Bridge is still. Yeah, it protected. They were wooden. Protected the roadway. So there was a lot of
I thought it was pigeon poop.
What's that?
I thought it was pigeon poop.
Yeah, getting moldy and slippery. Yeah, that would be a problem.
Now you just got to brave it.
I know.
And then there was an iron bridge, 1877. The wooden one was torn down, and they put an iron bridge there, 1877 to 1926, when the current one was. So next year's 100th anniversary of that bridge. So yeah.
So the flow of the river, the width of the river, was it about the same at that time as it is now, or what?
Except for the embankment, the flood wall in the early 70s that went out into.
So it's narrowed.
Yeah, narrowed.
It's narrowed a little bit because that's the front wall.
And you remember maybe the hobo jungle, Chris knows about that. There's a big loop in the river. Went all the way around to the back of the Kroger store over there, Fifth Avenue. There's a big loop went way back there. And so it was this big peninsula stuck out. And that was where the hobos on, because the trains would go by. And
Yeah.
the first fairground.
Yeah, I think we got to, I think that's the same place we went for archaeology.
Oh.
You did some
So,
digging back there?
Yeah, we got to go once back there. Most of the time it was at Miller's farm.
Some of those hobo nickels.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
They're
was,
supposed to have Indian artifacts and everything.
yeah. Then when the flood wall came, they just cut the river channel right straight through.
That was in the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Flood wall was finished about 71 or
71.
Someone just asked me that.
Yeah.
So the early planners of Fremont didn't think anything about, like, right next to the river, Great Black Swamp, we're gonna have a flooding problem?
No, people always settle by
No.
the river, and
They
I
visit the
mean, look
river.
at Florida. People keep building by the water, and it keeps.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of.
Because it was
access.
shipbuilding in the first years before the railroads. The river was.
And on the
Like,
east
Were
side,
they
that
part
was
of the
all
logging
factories.
also that went through like, you know, Oak Harbor and everything? Logging was a big business back then. Was that here too?
I don't know if they logged
I don't know
here.
if
If
it
they
was
logged here
logging.
that much, that was Oak Harbor.
Yeah, but I didn't know if they
No, by
all
Ward's
went the
Canal.
same way.
Funny story, Gibsonburg had French Canadians there chopping down their oak
Oh,
because it was like 200 feet high and the first wind would be 60 feet out. So the French Canadians would chop that oak down, ship it up to Oak Harbor. That's where it got its name.
Yeah, and then they just floated down the river
okay, all right,
because that's where it expanded.
okay. So
And he
it
was talking about like the river on the east side where you've got some buildings and houses. Those all factories.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
That's
was
how
all
they
factories.
would
East
ship.
State Street was all
Okay.
factories.
Oh.
Herbrand was there, and Klaus,
Okay,
and it was just all industrial.
Yeah,
okay.
And then it curved around behind there. There's a couple old houses still back
there
there.
is. There's probably like.
If you look, there's a street called Wall Street, I think it is, back in there,
Yeah.
where the
Most of you
river
probably
used to
never
go.
driven through there. It's
One house is still there. Used to be a house of prostitution.
Well, you
Ill,
told me
ill
that.
repute.
Ill repute.
I was trying to
Ill
trigger
repute.
you.
No, you triggered me.
On Wall
Ill
Street?
repute.
And the funny part is, everybody was here at that time. I'd ask them, "Oh, we knew about it, but I never been there."
How'd you
Never
know
forget
about
And
it?
they said, "I heard about it."
You know,
The old
rumors.
the
Was it
old-
Miss Rice's book?
The
I'm
old
just kidding.
Colonial Hotel, this is what a townie told me. I'm not a townie, I'm from Dayton originally. He said if you went by the old Colonial Hotel, which is where Whitey's is,
Oh,
there'd be a light on. And if the green light was on, I think it was
busy.
Ruby's.
Sounds
Ruby's
better,
was
like a
open.
Ruby. I like that.
That house is still there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the green meant go.
Yes. Green meant go, red meant stop.
So
I said,
when will it be restoring that house? Are we restoring that house?
I know. When
we would.
Mike and
we
I
should.
are gonna partner with that. It's gonna be a
We should. It's a,
speakeasy.
All of Mike's house will be there.
Speakeasy.
Span downtown Inc.
Yeah,
across the river.
there we go.
Yeah.
But you know, with the you all, some of you may have lived through it, but with downtown did flood a lot. I mean, on
Yeah.
the Shoemies building, there were marks on the building where it flooded.
And
because,
Clinton State, on that far side, wasn't there a hotel there that used to get flooded every,
Well,
it seemed like
Hotel
every
Fremont.
Hotel
10
Fremont.
years?
And it would,
Yeah.
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 Because that's how it eventually.
Well, I gotta tell you, without the flood wall, it does save our bacon, because you look at that at certain times. So earlier in the year, what was it? So we're in June. It would have been April. If you look at the State Street Bridge, that water was
Yes.
almost to the top of those arches. I mean, not quite, but
Yeah, it
very,
was
very
getting
high.
there.
So it does save.
Bottleneck.
You can see why, but they don't. You all know what happened in the 60s and 70s. They usually don't build that way now. They wouldn't do a river wall like this now because things have changed. But
there was so much water on North Front by the Sugar Beets that was a whirlpool effect.
yeah,
Oh,
Kids
wow.
drowned because they got sucked into that water.
yeah.
And I've got stories where I think the house is still there on Front. It was on one of those side streets, and the guy was in a rowboat looking through the top window, second floor, and watching a rat eat a piece of cake off a table. That's how high the water is.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Isaac Floro came from Port Clinton to help us, and they found his body up on a tree on Ohio Avenue.
Oh,
He
wow.
drowned.
The 13 flood was the worst. It was 21 and a half feet.
I do remember
And
about that.
Tiffin, 19 people died in Tiffin.
Yep.
And 3 here in Fremont. And it's just the water. They came up so fast, they get up on their upper, where the Trestle Bridge on North Front, there's a house right next to it. That was, some lady wrote the story about how they got trapped up there.
Wow.
And they had to squeeze out of those, and that house is still there.
Oh.
And there was a picture taken from the Trestle Bridge, and the water was so high the street signs was half empty street signs.
Well, there's pictures of boats down,
The Finch
rowboats
boat,
down
yeah,
front.
those pictures.
They're pulling people out of the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the child's family was doing it.
Yes, I remember you
Okay.
shared. It's from the 60s. Wasn't there some stuff from the
Yeah.
60s?
Well,
with
this
people?
is from the 1913. Yeah, there was a flood in 59,
Yeah.
I think.
Finch took up pictures and put a book out on 13. And then in 59, there were 2 of them. one in January, one in February.
It's the spring is always when it hits.
And so that was when they finally decided, you know, we need to get a flood wall. And that, it took them over 10 years.
Well, Finley still hasn't done it, have they?
No,
What's that?
Finley is actually. Thanks for bringing that
Yeah,
up.
They got money.
I was thinking about
They,
that.
you know, downtown Finley's almost been rebuilt, and they're very, very similar. If you look at Fremont and you look at Finley, the whole kind of setup is the same. But when you go down there, I mean, if you've recently gone to downtown Finley, almost all of the historic buildings are gone because they've had to be rebuilt. Like Marathon just built the hotel, not just built, it's probably 5 years ago now. But yeah, they haven't done that, and I think it's a requirement now of some industries that it get built, but it hasn't yet. But they flood all the time, very badly.
They got the funding, I know.
Yeah, but they haven't done because again, access. Then your access gets a bit different. But the alternative is all your buildings. Yeah.
You know, I just want to say that Downtown Fremont, Inc. is doing a fabulous job with preserving the downtown and the buildings. And what's that?
No, continue. I didn't interrupt you. No, sorry.
Yeah,
He was telling me, he's like, it's 7:33. I'm like,
I know.
okay.
I just
Well, I
wanted
don't
to
want
put
you
a
to
plug.
stay
That's a
long and
teacher.
have
That's
to.
the teacher.
That's the teacher in
Well, I
That's
was
the teacher.
trying
The
to
bell rang. I'm like, that's okay.
Put I just looked. That's why I mentioned this. But before we go, I wanted to just give a plug to Downtown Fremont Inc. with everything, and Sean's here, of course, and everything. And there's a waiting list, right, for businesses. And
Yeah,
it's-
this is
I
some
mean,
fun
it's just-
stats for all of you to really pump Fremont up. Since 2014, $32 million has been invested in the downtown district, and I'm talking 4 or 5 blocks. And that's, you know, most of that is private investment. So, you know, that's really cool. But, you know, you've got the amphitheater, you've got the library, you've got GLCAP, you've got restaurants and Sean's developments and Tom's. I mean, you have a lot going on, and that's not counting, you know, all of the individual businesses have put in 50,000, 100,000. So that's a lot of investment. I think we all need to be really, really proud of it because, as you all know, not a lot of downtowns are doing that or able to.
Or preserve so many
You know,
buildings.
because a lot of the buildings, you know, I know, for instance, this project that just finished, you know, was very close to being not viable anymore. The Shumi's building.
Is that right?
Yes. So with the roof the way it was, you know, you had maybe 3 or 4 years, and that building wouldn't have been able to be saved. So, you know, that to me that's great because these buildings are 100 plus years old, and they're going to stand for another 100 years. Hopefully, the next generation will continue it. But I think it's a big thing, and I know when you're all in it, you know, it's just like, oh, it's Fremont, but people really look up to all of us in Fremont here, and it's a big deal. I mean, that's hard to get all that investment because that's, again, most of it's private investment. So it's a big thing.
And those buildings down around Krogan Street, the real old ones,
Yes.
built in the 1850s.
Yeah.
I mean, 175
Right across
years.
from Burchard Library, those are really. You talking about that section?
Well, yeah, but also like
Talking about Sonic or the.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about where Lytle's was, you know,
Okay.
all those,
Yes.
the moonshine,
Yes.
all of that whole strip there.
Yep.
1850.
And the old Masonic building, a young man just bought that. He's
Oh,
redoing
really?
it. Yep.
Yeah,
Ben
Buckland built that,
Yep.
the old Masonic,
Oh,
in 1853.
What are they gonna do with it?
So if you look at that, it got the front of it got painted black. So he took possession of that this year, and the second floor is being converted right now to office or whatever space, and then eventually he'll get to the 3rd floor. So that's a nice young man, another investor that's
Yeah.
putting into that. I mean, Bob Hammer was a great property owner, but you know, after I think 50 years of owning it, he's passed it on. So that's great news because again,
Kept
it doesn't always happen.
Right.
So
So much preservation there.
That's good.
The history's still here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really cool. Some of the buildings that we own, there's some really cool up in the upper areas. People have over the decades, people have signed their name and put a date on it, and you'll see. I think we have one as far back as I think it was. I'm trying to remember. If it was 1891 is definitely one of them. I've had some from the. Right. It's really cool. Some of them are just signatures. Some of them are actually like freehand painted. They look kind of like the Shumi block letter, but you can tell that was somebody's signature, and it looks like like typeface almost. It's
every time you
amazing.
pull up a layer of wallpaper, there's like a signature.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, 1920s, we're in the 20s.
This is a tradition to sign as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But Sean, you showed me when you were doing the apartments down at 101. I mean, above Dreyfus there.
Yep.
I think it was 1864.
Yep. 1864. We found. We were trying to figure out one of the walls that we had. This was over at what is now Elroy's, but we were trying to figure out how the walls were built and the structural integrity of them, that sort of thing. So, an architect was like, okay, we need to cut a hole in here to look in and see what's going on. So one of the carpenters just went, oh, where do you? He's like, just anywhere on the wall. He went and grabs his hammer and he goes, bah! Puts a hole in the wall, and then they saw it out and the whole thing. And on the other side of where he hit it, there were signatures, almost like they were meant to be found. If he would have gone one step over, he would have been in between two other studs, and we would have never even seen it. But it was a really cool find.
Horsehair plaster everywhere. Everyone would be like, what's this weird material?
Yeah, that's more. Yeah, there's some horsehair plaster. The roofs are another thing that we see.
Horsehair in the roof.
Yep.
There was horsehair up there.
Yep.
Never knew that.
They put horsehair inside of their tar in order to give it some sort of binding and rigidity to it. So kind of neat.
So it's neat when the new contractors come in. They're like, "What is this?" And everybody stares at it. And they're like,
I would have done the same way.
Yeah.
Didn't people back then kind of like treat construction projects like time capsules? I mean, they would hide stuff in the walls and everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had an old house in Gibsonburg that was built in the 1890s. Every time we redid a room or pulled the plaster off or a woodwork off,
There's like a jar.
we would find something, like
Yep.
an 1898 Sears Roebuck catalog
Yeah.
or a railroad schedule.
You find
And then
a
you
lot
go
of
to a
newspapers.
museum and you'd see it, in a case somewhere.
Yeah.
Like,
You'll
I got
find
that
a
in my
lot of
basement.
They did.
a lot of
They
this
signed
stuff.
their work.
Newspapers. People will find newspapers stuck in
Yeah,
places.
I did.
Yeah.
They'd wrap their pipes in them.
Yeah.
I had old World War II newspapers wrapped around my pipes in the basement.
Yeah.
Or use it as insulation.
Yeah.
My grandma's house was like that.
All up to code.
We had to reinforce the foundation of the back of this green area of this building.
So
And
right here, back
they-
in the back of Pottery Perfection here, the green part. What he's talking about. Go ahead.
they dug it way down, basically where you can see the outside of the stone wall. And as part of doing that, they found an old iron horseshoe, just covered in rust and that sort of thing. Horseshoe, just plain as day. So you never know what you're gonna find in some of these projects. Like, holy crap, when's the last time a horse has been down here?
Another fun story is right in front of the Garrison when they were redoing Garrison Street. Do you remember that? They took it all the way down and fixed it and everything. There was the streetcar rail, and we have sections of the streetcar.
There's actually Front Street. There actually still is streetcar rail under Front Street to this day. Yep.
Did they remove the brick that was on Front
So
Street?
most of the brick on Garrison
The brick on the Garrison section's gone because they dug that all the way down to soil and then rebuilt the whole road surface.
Before they did that, that was one of the oldest streets, and I know 'cause my office is here. We had wooden pipes,
Oh, okay.
and
yeah.
they told us, and an engineer came up and he had it watered. It was a wooden pipe.
They last
That was
forever.
a wooden sewer
Yeah.
pipe
Yeah.
in the Garrison Road before they redid
And
that.
it was
Just
They're
There was
perfect.
just,
They will last forever, and they don't hold the bacteria and everything.
yeah. So it's just kind of interesting, but yeah, the streetcar rail, the horseshoes, bottles, lots of bottles. So fun facts. There'll be buried treasure someday, I swear.
never know what you're gonna find. There's a building down here that has an old in the attic. There's an old basically wheel that was they used it for almost like an elevator basically, but it was up in the attic, and they have you can the rope's long gone, but it was all rigged up and everything, and you're just plain as day, and you can tell when you look at it. It's really hard to get to, so it's still there, but you can tell this was like handcrafted, handmade. Took a long. It was reinforced. I mean, this thing is a beast of a wheel, but it survived all those years up in the attic, just hanging out.
Any other questions?
Any
The walk on the 19th, like how far is that going to be? Like if I bring my 94-year-old mother, would she be able to make it?
Well, I don't know her.
She would be able to.
We can do those.
Yeah, and it,
Fire meets for you.
yeah, you could just have her meet up there.
Yeah,
Just have her meet
there's
up
a
there.
parking lot right behind the house.
We mainly just
I'll
give
park
prep
there.
people here and then have them use the restroom and then walk
Because
up.
right here's
Yeah.
Arch Street, so
Yeah.
you gotta just walk up to High and then
But it is a
couple
little bit of
houses
a
past.
walk, but just have her go up there.
Yeah, it's just
If I can get her out of the house, I'm bringing
Yeah,
her.
there's a place to park right behind the
there
house.
is.
I'll park
Has its
there.
own parking area.
Yeah, and it's just I don't know, about 5 or 6 houses out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's pretty steep.
It is.
But it's
steep.
uphill all
It
the
is.
way.
It is a little steep. If you're
but it's
especially
downhill all the way back.
Makes you roll a little faster.
That's right. So, thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. Hopefully you had fun.
Thanks for coming.
Good.
This was great.
They're available for signatures, photos.
Yeah. So,
They're available for rent. I'm just joking.
Jeez.
Party entertainment.
I'm sorry, but your green light is on.
Graduation party.
Green light's on.
Yeah.
yeah, the green light's on.
I have a T-shirt made with that.
The green light's on.
No, no.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Inside joke.
Nobody would know what it is.
Glad to be here.
See Mike with his green shirt on.